Again, thank you for joining us this evening for What I Wish My Parents Knew. Our theme this evening is motivation. I'm Shannon Strassner. I'm the program manager for Real Connections, a school-based family resource center located at Canyon Hills High School. The What I Wish My Parents Knew forums are a collaborative effort between youth, community partners, and schools, including, and those community partners include Say San Diego and the San Diego Military Family Collaborative, and the action team of that collaborative, What I Wish My Parents Knew. Our youth play a crucial role in co-creating these forums so that they are timely, rich, and meaningful to our families and youth. Throughout the forum this evening, you're going to hear from youth as they share their experiences around motivation, what keeps them motivated, what's hindering motivation, and how parents and caregivers can best support them. You'll also hear from Ed Wisz about the connection between motivation and other mental health challenges and signs that a youth may need additional support. And finally, conversation starters families can use to open up communication about this topic. Later on, you'll have an opportunity to ask youth panelists and Mr. Wisz questions. So we're going to get started by watching a brief video where leaders respond to data from the youth survey.
Over 70% of surveyed youth identified lack of motivation as a leading mental health issue. Why do you all think that is?
I think a lot of people are overstimulated, like with world issues and stuff like that, and along with having to deal with schoolwork and all kinds of different things. I think a lot of people feel like there's too much coming at them, so they're not feeling motivation to put their energy into anything because they don't have a lot of energy left.
I think along with that too, I think students feel kind of isolated, especially with all the hard classes that they take or just all the tests and stuff that they have to go through. And I think it's just kind of feeling like all of this, just kind of your world is crumbling down. So I think just kind of feeling like you're alone in this, because technically you sometimes have to go through this alone without any of your peers to help you through it.
There's also the point where we're all online, and because of that, many people have their phones or access to things right next to them. Instead of listening to class or doing work, they went on their phones and played.
And an example of that I distinctly remember was finding out about what was going on at the Capitol while I was in chemistry. My class literally paused in the middle of it for all of these kids to start putting "check your phones" in the chat sort of thing.
Especially with the growth of technology and communication outside of real talking, people have started to lose actual connections with people that they can genuinely rely on. And without people to understand what they're going through, it only builds up how stressed and things grow up, the more things they have to do.
Good evening, everybody. So my name is Stacy Childs, and I work with Say San Diego's alcohol and other drug prevention program stationed at Canyon Hills High School, where I have the pleasure of working with many of the young people you're about to hear from this evening. As Shannon mentioned just now, tonight's topic dives into the relationship between motivation and mental health. Tonight's topic was chosen just how all previous What I Wish My Parents Knew topics are selected, by youth survey results. Back in December, a youth-led mental health working group connected to Canyon Hills surveyed youth asking a question. Identify the top 3 mental health topics or areas that you feel need to be addressed. And then it says, please consider yourself and other students. The survey responses provided students with around 12 different mental health topics, some of which were stress, depression, anxiety, drug and alcohol abuse among youth, just to name a few. However, over 70% of youth surveyed indicated that motivation or lack thereof was the topic that needed to be addressed. We all know the topic of motivation can be ambiguous, and it's a typical feeling for everyone to experience from time to time. However, one thing that is important is the understanding that feeling a lack of motivation could be a symptom of a deeper mental health challenge. And so that prompted us to explore further. We sent out a second survey asking students 3 more detailed questions related to motivation. Those 3 questions were, what do you think some factors that may impact you and your peers' motivation in your daily life? Number 2 was, what are some internal and external factors that help you feel motivated in your life? And lastly, what are some ways your parents or caregivers can support you with feeling motivated? So each student you're about to hear from next will share a summarized version of what their peers said in the survey, as well as sharing their unique perspective and insight. And so right now I'm going to turn it to Daniel, who's our first student that is going to be sharing, and he's going to be sharing survey responses tied to the first question. Daniel, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you. When people are suffering from a lack of motivation, there are usually underlying mental health issues linked to that. Our survey question asked students what were some factors that impacted them and their peers' motivation in their daily life. The most common responses were related to school and the COVID-19 pandemic. After coming back from the lockdown, most kids said that trying to balance their social lives along with all the work that they got from school, like homework, projects, studying, and lack of breaks, made them lose a lot of self-motivation in things. Assimilation back into the daily grind of school from countless months of lockdown and not doing much is too quick for a lot of people to handle. And so as the work stacks up, it really only gets harder for them. And students would get overwhelmed quickly, and they have little motivation to keep on going. Some responses to the question were seeing and hearing we might go back to online learning is something that is so just depressing to see, and that their grades slip. And it impacted them and their motivation just going to school. And sheer amounts of work in some of my classes, I'm given homework every day, I get overwhelmed and I get behind. It's like a vicious cycle. I know that my personal experience from going from lockdown into walking to class with the schedule change and having to see people in real life instead of just lying down on the couch all the time, it was a lot for me to just get used to quickly. And it was very rocky, and I'm still kind of not used to it yet. Substance abuse can have a big impact on people's self-motivation and mental health. It can make them feel as if they have, or like the drugs, substances that you take can mimic depression and other mental illness problems, or it can amplify ones that people already have. Cannabis and other brain impacting drugs have a big impact on motivation in school and other topics. According to the US National Library of Medicine, several large studies have demonstrated that the main risks of drugs is motivation loss, addiction, mild cognitive decline, and schizophrenia. And it's just that taking drugs and stuff will only make people feel worse about how motivated they are in school.
Thanks, Daniel. You are so relatable and sharing your experiences, especially with your transition from being virtual to going back on campus. And I know many people here feel that as well. And sharing about going one step further in those factors that impact motivation that maybe students didn't report out, but that were still very significant in the youth, the influence of using drugs and alcohol and how that could mimic other mental health challenges. So great job. You did fantastic, and you even went the extra step in providing some research. So thank you, thank you. Next up, we have Nick, who's going to share the survey results and his perspective with the second question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Alcorn, and I will be presenting the results to the survey question that says, what internal factors and external factors, what are some internal factors and external factors that keep you motivated in your life? So reading through these responses myself has given me like a fresh dose of perspective about how many students struggle in different ways to find motivation, and also the many ways that they're able to rediscover it for themselves. So I'll dive right into the internal factors first, which I kind of categorize as like thoughts, feelings, and motives for a lot of students. So one of the main sources of internal motivation was future goals. So a lot of them just use the word future in all of their essentially their goals for after high school, like whether it's building a family when you grow up, future success in anything that you happen to pursue, and a lot of things about looking at the bigger picture, like those things, especially since we're taught, as I'm a junior right now, looking toward college and just this big world that we're being immersed into. A lot of kids are looking that way since they're a lot of times taught to look that way. And some students even said that they feel like no one besides themselves can really motivate them, just because they have that drive, and if they don't have that support, they find that within themselves to keep them moving forward. Going along with like the theme of future motivation, we also have career motivation, more specifically talking about getting a job, whether it's in high school or thinking about a career that you want to pursue after going to college or during college, and also just more obscure different things like making money for your family right now, trying to get a good paying job so you can live a comfortable life, things like that. And another thing going along with that is finding happiness. A lot of kids talked about having hobbies as something that they can do within themselves without needing to go to someone else to do things like that. People mentioned like things like skateboarding, gaming, boxing, guitar, and people even cited enjoyment of learning as a motivation to do well, whether it's in school or outside in their own learning pursuits. And something that I especially relate to with this is that, especially coming out of quarantine, I've finally been able to re-immerse myself back into theater, which is something that I take part in a lot, something that brings me a lot of joy. And just being able to take the time out of my schedule just to do that makes everything I do a little bit more bright, I guess. And it gives me a reason to get up and keep going every single day. So it's therapeutic, and it gives me a reason just to keep moving forward. And the second greatest motivation from the internal, external factors was academics. A lot of students talked about, of course, the pressures that are on them to be academically successful. A lot of them talked about trying to keep themselves busy, getting good grades, getting a certain GPA. There's a whole list of students just listing all the academic achievements that they want to have, whether it's comparing themselves to their peers or just having all these deadlines at school and things like that. So going along with that, again, I like that academic side of things. There's also the external factors, which are pressures, supports, and outlets, kind of. So one of the main external factors that was named was feeling safe, whether it's a safe location, and right now that's moving in between online school and in-person school. People are feeling safe with the prospect of getting to stay in in-person school, because a lot of kids feel safer that way in their learning and being able to be around other students in a physical space. And then having a non-stressful environment, whether it's having like a clean room at home, like go back to, so you don't feel like stressed out about all things like that. And this, of course, varies a lot for different students during quarantine, and it varies now, like what's comfortable, whether in-person school is more comfortable, less comfortable, depending on how you feel about the pandemic. All these things are varying between students, so it's good to keep that in mind when you talk about like what's best for students and what's helping students' mental health. Another external factor that a lot of students name was staying active. A lot of people mentioned sports like basketball, cheer, color guard, and things like that. And a lot of them said, without sports, I would be failing and just hang out on the street and stuff like that. Like just hang out with my friends, not being productive. I wouldn't have an outlet for anything. This is another thing that I kind of relate to, because during quarantine, in the depths of quarantine, when we were completely online and everything, I stayed involved in cross country. and it became my main source of human interaction. I got to go outside and exercise, and I got to share my experiences with other students going through the same things. And then I stayed involved with real connections. I did some of these What I Wish My Parents Knew forums. We had like weekly and bi-weekly meetings, and that was another source of human interaction and another way for me to put in work to help the school and to help myself, I guess, improve as a person and put more things out into the community. So staying active is a big thing for a lot of people. And so keeping with external factors, the largest factor out of internal and external, out of all of them, was friends, family, and inner circle support. So this has ranged from being able to hang out with friends, seeing what your friends are doing and being able to have them support you in your academic or other pursuits, and just having other people to connect with and relax with, and people to keep you motivated who care about you and who will push you to do better in your life, and generally just having other people that want you to succeed. And also the selfless side of things, wanting to do better for the people you love, wanting to be a role model for younger siblings, and wanting to make your parents proud, just wanting to see a smile on their face at something you did. All kinds of things like that are the biggest source of motivation for all of these students, because human connection is just so important to everything we do, especially during quarantine. We saw that again, that the human connections we had a great impact on us. So pursuing these connections and keeping them is very important in helping motivation and things like that. So those are our main factors. Coming out of external factors, I know that we often rush into solutions before we talk about the existing problems. So as Daniel did with a lot of things, I wanted to acknowledge that in response to this question as well, there was a student who plain out said, I don't really have anything that motivates me. I feel like doing my work and then I'll do it if I guess I do. And based on conversations I've had with my peers, we could find many more students who would say the same. So this is why we need both internal and external factors to help keep students motivated amid everything that's thrown at them, make sure that we have examples for students, and that we're encouraging students to find their source of motivation so that they can feel good about their place in the school and their place in the world around them.
Wow, thank you so much, Nick. It's definitely reassuring and encouraging to hear what you do and what your peers do to stay motivated. And then it really just highlights the importance of like taking care of ourselves and making ourselves a priority to just contribute to like our mental health and wellness and well-being. So you did a beautiful job. Thank you so much. Lastly, we have Marissa, who's going to share the last question.
Okay, so my question is, what are some ways that parents and caregivers can support students with feeling motivated? And the important thing to remember is that as parents, you do have a heavy sway over how your children are doing, especially in pandemic time where we are all a lot closer than we would probably like to be. Being stuck in my own house, we had 5 people coordinating 5 different Zoom calls all at the same time. And with that, it was difficult to find a dedicated workspace to do my homework and for all of us to get our stuff accomplished. And without having a teacher there to guide you and to help you, having that sort of internal motivation became difficult. It was so much easier to just watch the Zoom call in my bed and not even have to get dressed for the whole day. And as the COVID-19 pandemic has progressed, so have mental health issues. Currently, 1/4 of all youths report having depression or depression symptoms. And that also leads to a decrease in motivations. Internal motivation is already hard enough for kids to keep up, and with the added stressors of the pandemic and the difficulty with being able to find and create support systems, that only progresses. But the important thing is that there are ways to help. The most important thing is to not pressure kids or put added stressors and to hold them to the same standards that they were being held to before the pandemic. The pandemic has been difficult for all of us, and it has been difficult to make that slow recovery back to where we previously were. And pressure can lead to feeling overwhelmed, and it can lead to anxiety. And then you just sort of shut down and you don't really want to do anything and to keep working. In addition to that, one important thing that many students mentioned was the desire for encouragement and positive affirmation. Positive affirmation specifically results in the production of the neurotransmitter dopamine, which actually is what regulates motivation and learning. So just telling your child that they are doing enough, that they are doing okay, that everything is going to be fine can do a world of good for them. I mean, in my own life, whenever I was getting overwhelmed, I would do this thing where I would catastrophize. I would take this one assignment and it would snowball into this big thing where I'm going to fail this class and I'm never going to graduate and I'm never going to go to college and my entire life is going to fall apart. And my mom just telling me that this isn't the end all be all and this isn't who I am as a person was enough for me to find the motivation to keep trying and keep working and to keep going. Another important thing is just to check in with your student, ask them about what they're learning, what they're doing. Even if they don't answer, it's helpful to know that there is someone that you can go to. My best studying comes from just explaining my day to my unwilling and unsuspecting family members. They have heard a lot more about psychology than they probably want to. In general, it's just important to understand that for us, school matters a lot. We have lost a lot of the things that we have lost a lot of the support systems that we used to have and a lot of the activities that we used to have, and we can't really go anywhere. So school is where a lot of the people that we interact with are, and to have someone who is outside of that environment and is able to encourage us and to keep us grounded is helpful and a necessity. And just being stable and being there is perfectly enough to help students feel motivated to keep going and to keep learning and to keep trying. Everyone is doing their best and we are all going to get through this together. And with that, we're going to transition into our expert speaker, Mr. Ed Wisz, who has been a school psychologist for the past 30 years in San Diego County. And during those years, he has worked in the roles of lead psychologist, senior psychologist, and a director of special education for 5 years in a small rural school district. His early background is in child development, and he even worked as a preschool teacher for 2 years. He is a proud dad to a tween daughter and a teenage son. Ed Wisz will be discussing the connection between motivation and mental health challenges, as well as sharing tips and conversation starters family may use to strengthen their relationships. Thank you for being here, Ed Wisz, and the floor is yours.
Oh my gosh, you guys did such an amazing job going over those, summarizing those surveys. And then the responses you got from the surveys were incredible. I'm like going, what am I going to talk about now? You guys did such a good job. Okay, it's so embarrassing. Look, my picture in there. I'm wearing the exact same jacket that I'm wearing now. How sad is that? So yeah, as we look at motivation, when Stacy and Shannon approached me too, I said, oh gosh, motivation, it's really quite subjective, right? So if everyone here who's participating on this Zoom, if I asked you, please define motivation, each and every one of us would come up with a different definition of it, right? Because I think Stacy even said ambiguous, right? It's subjective, that type of thing. It's not something that you can measure. Like I see, oh, you're being motivated right now. It's like, you can't tally or observe that. But for purposes of this discussion, and I think a lot, and I'll keep it brief because you guys did such a good job with those survey responses, and you guys seem really in touch with the subject too. We'll try to leave a big chunk of the time for those questions for the panel and that type of thing. But for purposes of this discussion, let's say motivation, it's basically the essential part of working towards a goal, the critical components of that, objectives that we have, like Nick was talking about, you know. It's also one of the driving forces that it fuels competition and it makes for human connection. And the opposite end, the absence of motivation can also lead to mental illness like depression. So as you can see from the slide here up on the screen, there's different types of motivation. I know Nick referred to like internal and external factors. So external factors from maybe the community or things happening, internal factors that you have for yourself. So in most of the body of the research, they talk about their extrinsic factors, meaning there's an external influence that impels people to act how they do. For example, your family may value very much doing well in school. So an extrinsic factor could be a token or an activity. Hey, son or daughter, education is so important to us as a family unit. We value that greatly. You're going to earn your outside time and your Xbox time and your video time based on how well you do academically, that type of thing. Or we'll take you to Boomers or to Disneyland, that type of thing. Those are external factors or extrinsic types to motivate. Intrinsic is really what we're all trying to strive for, meaning that we're wanting to be motivated towards an objective or a goal because we want to, meaning like Nick going in cross country. This was my time last week. I want to improve my time. Why do I want to improve my time? Because I want to get better, right? That's an intrinsic factor to that. I want to do well because it makes me feel better. It raises my dopamine levels, right, Marissa? Our neurotransmitters and our frontal cortex. It does all that kind of good stuff. And that's what we're really trying to aim for, is kind of more intrinsically being motivated to a goal or an objective. The introjected or identified, it gets a little interesting here, but all of you can relate to this, because like introjected avoidance is meaning pretty much, you know, that you're doing something because you don't want to make someone feel bad, like maybe your parents. Maybe you want to do well in school because you know it's really bumming or depressing your parents out, so that's why you want to do it. Or in the same factor with peers, you know, that you're doing something, you know, kind of what peer pressure is. But sometimes that can work for us too, like as parents. Like my daughter doesn't keep the cleanest of rooms, right? And I can tell her till I'm blue in the face of like, you know, I need for you to at least make your bed and pick up your stuff off the floor every day, but it wasn't going anywhere. But her friends came over, and one of her friends happened to say, boy, your room looks like a pigsty. Guess what? She started cleaning up her room. So there's positives to those introjected or identified ways of motivation. So going to the next slide, as we look at how it relates to mental health and to mental illness, which is kind of probably why y'all invited me to talk about that. But mental health is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It really affects how we think, feel, and act. It helps determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and make healthy choices. This is an important thing to walk away here, that although the terms are used interchangeably, poor mental health is not mental illness. They're not the same. Meaning a person can experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with mental illness. Likewise, a person diagnosed with mental illness can experience periods of physical, mental, and social well-being. And as you think about, you know, you've heard maybe your parents say, I'm going to take a mental health day, meaning we can all have a day where we're not feeling very well. We don't want to get out of bed. We had a poor interaction with our friends or with colleagues the day before, and we're having a poor mental health day. Mental illness, as we look at that, is much different, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But it's important. Mental health is important not only for our mental health, but also for our physical health. Particularly, if you're having poor mental health or even been diagnosed with mental illness, can affect you, you know, physically, like you're more prone to possibly getting diabetes or heart disease or even a stroke. Can your mental health change over time? Most definitely. It's important to remember a person's mental health can change over time when demands or exceed the resources or coping abilities. For example, if you're working long hours or putting in a lot of work with school, or as many of our families that I work with, if they're going through economic hardship, that can put stresses and strains on the family, and that can ebb and flow over time, our mental health. How common are mental illnesses? About 1 in 5 children, either currently or at some point during their life, may have a serious mental illness. 1 in 5 Americans experience mental health or mental illness in a given year. So as we look at those factors down below on the slide, what causes our mental illness? It can be early adverse life experiences, the trauma that happens early in life. It can be related to ongoing medical issues, like if some of our students may be diagnosed with cancer or other debilitating diseases. It can also be biological factors, genealogy, our family genealogy, or like Marissa said, variances and chemical imbalances with dopamine levels. And then like Daniel had talked about, the use of alcohol or drugs can definitely impact a student's mental health. And if already diagnosed with mental illness, can even exacerbate those issues. And there's over 200 mental health disorders. I gave a couple for the last slide when we look at that, a couple of resources, which I just think are great resources. Mentalhealth.org is a great website. And then even the CDC, and you might be thinking, really, Mr. Wisz, what does the Centers for Disease Control have to do with it? It's just a great website. It has so much information on there. One of my other favorite websites is kidshealth.org, and it puts it in the language for parents, for teenagers, and then for children even, which is awesome. So some of those causes down there at the end, having feelings of loneliness or isolation. So here's the big thing. So you're probably thinking, okay, Mr. Wisz, then what do clinicians look at? You said our mental health can ebb and flow from daily or from weekly, but when does it constitute as a mental health illness? So one of the biggest, if not the biggest thing that we look at is, does it adversely impact our ADLs, our activities for daily living? Meaning, like I think Marissa even said there were some days you wanted to sleep in, right? And didn't want to get out of bed and that kind of thing. And that's okay. Okay, we all have those days where we can feel super sad or angry about something. But it's when it starts to affect, now you're doing that all week, 2 weeks in a row. So that would be an example of where that's adversely affecting your activity for daily living. Are you an individual who might be, again, you have a bad day, you want to, Mom, Dad, can I go to Cold Stone? Can I get an ice cream, right? That's okay. But if you're overeating, or if you're under eating, if you might have friends, it's like, I had a really bad day, I'm not very hungry, I don't have an appetite. And that again is okay. But if it's over time, you're starting to see that stretch on for longer periods of time. That's one of the key indicators that we as clinicians look at when diagnosing mental illness. And that then becomes the concern. And then that's where you start to seek out, maybe some professional help. But that's the big thing that we're looking for. And I know as you guys talk about as students for your panel, I think there's a handout Stacy has of like, mind what you say, parents, because your children are listening. On the same token, we as parents, really the biggest thing that we can do with our children is listen to them, to just sit down and listen to what they have to say. Mom, Dad, I had a really tough day, or I'm having a really tough time in chemistry or biology or that type of thing. And is to take that quality time of not just, oh, you'll improve, you have a history of improving, it'll get better. Of taking that time. In fact, we kind of do that at our house. It's our kitchen table. And my kids know it's like, okay, time for serious discussion, come down to the table. So where you're actually facing the children and then they're doing most of the talking. We as parents have a tendency to where we want to fix everything, right? We want to fix it. You had a bad day. Oh, let's go for a walk, let's, go get ice cream, that kind of thing. And oftentimes, children just want to be heard, and we need to empower our children that they're making those good decisions and choices on their own, which increases our intrinsic motivation, right? We're empowering you as children, and we're saying, good job. We have a tendency as parents to kind of want to fix things, and more often than not, our children want to be heard. And then that last slide has some activities. So what can you do, parents and students, to start a discussion? Again, one of the big things, I love that kidshealth.org. It's a great website. If you guys pop on there, any question you have related to health or mental health will be there. Put it in the search box, and then you can determine whether you want it in the language for a teenager or in the language for a parent or language for a kid. So one of that survey from Mind Tools, either parents opening that up or students opening that up, that could be a good way to jumpstart a discussion. And then also, Stacy, do you have that handout from the National Association from School Psychologists that had some good stuff?
I do. I'll paste it in the chat right now. The one I just pasted the link for the quiz in the chat, and then I'll do the article next.
Oh, okay, perfect. So yeah, that article from NASP, it's increasing children's academic motivation, encouraging positive family relationships and responsibility. It has bullets of what you can actually do step by step in having these discussions. And students bringing that to your parents, and parents bringing that to students, because as your survey results show, this pandemic, who knew, right? I mean, none of us knew this was coming, and it's kind of thrown everything upside down. To me, if anything, my big takeaway from this, though, is just to see how incredibly resilient our students are and our children are with this. You may be having a bad day, but your son or daughter comes home and said, they had struck up a good friendship, at school, or they're excited about going running later or playing in their soccer game that upcoming weekend. It's amazing. I don't know about the other folks, other adults, but I get a lot of energy and positive vibes from that. And children are truly amazing. But again, leave it for the questions. So if you guys have questions at that panel. But thanks again for having me. I'll stick on here for sure.
We would now like to thank our subject matter expert, Ed Wisz, for sharing and transition into our next and final segment of the evening, and that is our panel, where we will hear a little bit more from some of our youth leaders, along with Ed Wisz, our subject matter expert. If you do have any questions, please enter them into the chat box. I would like to turn the floor to our panel moderator, Emma Lenny, who is an intern working on her master's in social work with SAY San Diego's Real Connection Healthy Start. Emma, thank you for being here this evening, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jessie. Okay, so I think we'll get started, and in the spirit of highlighting our youth voices, we'll kick off the panel with a question for Shada. So Shada, have you ever felt unmotivated before, and what did you do to overcome the challenge?
Hi, thank you. So I have felt unmotivated before, which was fairly recently, and it was difficult for me to get out of bed. So one thing my counselor taught me to do, which doesn't work for everyone, but it worked for me, is to get like the most addicting thing you have on your phone. Like for me, it was YouTube. I would go on it like every day and completely remove it. But the trick is I can still access it on my laptop, so it's not completely gone. Because of that, I would need to get up from bed and go to the laptop to watch YouTube. And since my schoolwork is on my laptop, I ended up doing schoolwork more than going on YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You just highlighted kind of eliminating those distractions and maybe kind of enabling yourself to only do what's gonna be productive in that moment. So I really like that answer. Thank you. So Mr. Wisz, I have a question for you. So a common myth is that teenagers are lazy or just lack motivation. So have you found that there's any evidence that kind of links the decline in motivation to normal teenage development?
Yeah, there's that word lazy, right? Another subjective, how do you measure lazy? So what's important, parents and for you as students to know, I don't know if you know this, but your brain is going through its second biggest growth period right now. Birth to 4 is the biggest part our brain grows. But between 12 and about 16 years of age, your brain goes through another big growth period, and that's what it's doing right now. And then after that, your brain just kind of from there. But this is the other big growth period. And as part of that growth, one of the things is difficult for 12 to 16-year-olds, particularly as their brain's growing, going through the second big growth spurt, is that it's very difficult for them to see the consequences of their actions. And so oftentimes with that, and I particularly see this with my 9th graders, and probably if you know, the feeder middle schools for 8th grade and 9th grade, they don't, you know, because as parents, it's like, well, you need to get good grades because you need to get your high school diploma going to college. 14, 15-year-olds cannot see that far into the future. Our brains just have not developed that yet. So that's where maybe more is for freshmen and some sophomores. Again, there's a bell curve with that. We have to rely more on those extrinsic factors of motivation. Okay, you may not see the importance of getting good grades or getting a high school diploma now. However, I know how much you like to play on your Xbox, or how much you like to have your phone, right, Shada? So you can get on YouTube or TikTok or whatever. So we use that. And then dramatically, we see a huge difference. It's particularly in our juniors like Nick or seniors, where now they're like seeing, oh, I see now, you know, all of my hard work and effort and what I may want to be or do after high school. Do I want to go to college? Do I not want to go to college, get, you know, a job, that type of thing? We see a huge difference. So one of the things we have to keep in mind as parents, that developmentally, it's very appropriate for our 8th, 9th, and some of our 10th graders not to know or be motivated in doing well in school or in other parts of life, because they don't see the consequences of those actions or what they're putting into it now. So we go a little bit heavy on the extrinsic factors, and then the job would be for us is to slowly empower our children and for them to be more intrinsically motivated. But how we have to do that when they're 14, 15 is do extrinsic. And then we get to have the nice job when, you know, they're juniors and seniors of saying, see, remember how we talked about this? And then that it would change, because it does change. But yeah, that kidshealth.org or mentalhealth.org also has a lot of scientific evidence, whoever had posed that question for the panel, and lots more to look up there. But
yeah, I really like the idea of relying on external factors when we might not be feeling it inside. And I feel like the more we kind of have these conversations about like statistical evidence in the development, it'll spread empathy to adults to really understand why they're youth acting the way they are. So thank you for your answer. I'll go to Holly now. So Holly, can you share some of the things you're involved with at your school, and what kind of motivates you to get involved?
Definitely. So in school, I'm the president of Club Elevated, and that's part of our organization that we're within here. We have a lot of Elevated members with us, and we focus on substance abuse prevention and mental health awareness. And I've been in it since I was a freshman. And honestly, it's one of the best parts of my high school experience. I've gotten a lot of amazing opportunities to meet different people, and I've learned a lot more about the issues that affect people my age and people in my community. So that's been a really big outlet for me to have a lot of different learning experiences. I'm also an officer in our school's Dungeons and Dragons Club, and that's also been a really good social outlet for me. And I've gotten to meet a lot of other people in different grades. And I've also just learned more about, like, I've always been a huge nerd, but I've never really had like a community to share my nerdy interests with until I got into high school. So that was a really big thing for me to kind of develop my identity. And outside of school, I have a retail job that I started over the summer. And that's been a really big thing for me in building my confidence and getting better with people skills and communicating. So and that's also been a really good tool for helping me learn to balance like a job outside of school and then my schoolwork, because that's something that's going to translate with me as soon as I go into college and I have to have a job and school at the same time. So all of these things combined help me to have a really enriched social life. And I think that that's really the things that help me get out of bed in the morning and keep going.
Yeah, so it sounds like your involvement in all these different things help you kind of create communities for you at school. So do you have any thoughts on why others might not want to get involved on campus or have difficulties getting involved?
I was hesitant to get involved in campus at first just because I was new to the campus itself and I didn't know anybody when I first came, and I had really bad social anxiety when I was a freshman. Like I had a panic attack just thinking about going into school for the first time, let alone going into a room full of people I didn't even know. So I think for people, especially with COVID, like there are people that have been at the school for several years, but this is their first year in person here. And so that's very different from being online where you didn't really have to socialize with anybody if you didn't want to. So it's very anxiety producing just to think about having to be with people you don't know very well and being like presenting yourself in certain parts of yourself that you might not be comfortable with at first. And so I think that's a big aspect of it. And then also time management. If you don't know how to manage your time, or maybe nobody's really modeled that for you, you're scared to join different activities because you're worried that you're going to fall behind in your academics, which can then translate into more anxiety as you fall further behind.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's a shared experience, like you said, that some of these kids they're new to campus and don't know even where to go. So I think that's really valuable. Another question for you, as a student, from your perspective, do you feel that your peers are having challenges that they're not sharing with teachers, counselors, parents? And if so, what might those be?
I think this whole event is about motivation, and I think that we're hesitant to share with our teachers that we're not feeling motivated to do their classwork because we're overwhelmed with external factors in our lives. That could be anything from stressors from family issues, your friends, mental health issues that you're dealing with personally, or just you're having a hard time in their class. It's hard to communicate with your teacher like I'm struggling in your class, because you might feel like you're offending your teacher, or you might just be hard to admit to yourself that you're struggling with something. Trying to think what other issues. Being back on campus also, like I said, promotes a lot of social anxiety. So it's a really big transition for us to be back on campus in a classroom where we are just focusing on work for the entire time, which is over an hour in some cases, versus on lockdown, when we were on virtual school, we could have breaks on our phone, we could have our camera off, we could take breaks from class when we needed. So being able to structure our own learning environment isn't really as much of a thing now that we're back in in-person school. And so it's hard for that transition, and it's hard for us to communicate with our teachers on how to build a learning environment that works perfectly for us.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I feel like adults on campus know that students are struggling, but without knowing kind of those barriers that keep them from starting conversations, there's only so much they can do. So I really appreciate your perspective on that. Okay, we'll jump back to Shada. From your perspective, how has COVID challenged your motivation, and what is different maybe now staying motivated than pre-COVID times?
Yeah, so before COVID, I had like a whole routine, like everything fit perfectly. But then when COVID hit, all my like after school activities, all of them kind of shut down. Thankfully, Club Elevate continued to go through it with it. But most of my sports were like stopped, everything like stopped. So I had like more free time. and I didn't know what to do with it, so I just played video games. And then going back into school after like COVID has slightly died down, it became difficult because I wanted to do everything now, and then I bit more than I could chew. But then thankfully now I'm more relaxed and balancing things more.
Yeah, so I feel like this is just kind of our new reality that we're all trying to navigate and create our new routines, because they were really all were disrupted when COVID hit. So I feel like highlighting these differences we're experiencing now is really important, because we're kind of have a shared experience. Okay, I'll hop over to Mr. Wei. So as a psychologist on campus, how do you think we could open a conversation about motivation without causing kind of pressure or stress that could lead to a shutdown?
Starting a conversation about motivate, like with your parents, or like because you guys really strike me as student leaders on campus, and this is reminding me of a committee that we had looking at school culture, at least at our school. I know other schools and those parents have been invited to this as well. But Coach Dabney, if any of you had Coach Dabney, she retired, but her and I led a student cultural committee that looked at like how improving, like looking at character development, or looking at ways to positively reinforce, right, when students are doing well or getting involved or attending, because it is hard. Like Shada said, it when you had that length of period of time where you were at home, and I see the difference because like my kids were just out for a few months and they went back that September. Students in our district were out from spring to spring. That is a long time. And you start to develop, hopefully, some good things, but as we know, there's some poor habits, right? Shada, being on the phone with the YouTubes, having a little bit of time, but not big stretches of time. But I think starting to have those conversations, definitely bringing them up in class, particularly with those educators or counselors who are passionate about this, and like how having those discussions, because I'll tell you, Emma, this is what administrators talk about, because we have a fairly large percentage of students that are not coming to school. They do not feel motivated to come to school, and when they were on those Zooms, they weren't participating in those Zooms. So I firmly believe, I think students are our biggest resource. So if you guys actually think of ideas or ways in which to bring up the topic of motivation, but to how to encourage those discussions, please let us know, let your counselors know. Miss Ward, the vice principal at Canyon Hill, she's super passionate about this. And I'll tell you, we struggle with this. So, but I think you guys could come up with some really great ideas, and then definitely share that, like Miss Ward, Mr. Schmidt, Dean of Students, how we could get these topics discussed. Do any of you have any ideas right off the top of your head as I'm talking? Maybe let it marinate for a while, but why are you laughing, Nick?
No, I think there are so many things that, like, we talk to our peers and we hear a lot of things about, whether it's like people complaining about a teacher or just not knowing what to do with all these assignments, just like boiling over, and then like having commitments and other things. So I think there's going to be a big like search, I guess, for like how we want to present this to our peers, make it more marketable and understandable, so that they will feel motivated to find motivation, as it were. So yeah, I think it'll definitely be a process.
Or even like when I think of if students are starting, at least academically, how many know, like Stacy putting out their tutorial schedule, it's amazing. Our teachers, are available during lunch, after school, and then that lunchtime, right, tutorial over in the 1000 building. But how many of our students don't even know that that's available? Or what it comes is they do feel motivated to participate, but then, like you said, there's the external factors like, well, with transportation or whatever, I can't stay after school. So how do you get creative and do it differently, right? And I think a lot of students can be awesome peer tutors too, because yeah, there's students definitely struggling out there. So
Yeah, I agree. I feel like this is kind of a ongoing conversation, and one that students should be a part of, because they're the ones we're talking about. So it's how they would like to have these conversations. I think that's a really good perspective. And we did get a question in the chat. So what if students not involved in school activities are not involved in school activities and have no desire to be involved? Someone had missed ninth grade while they were doing it virtually, and they experienced not like a proper introduction back into extracurriculars at school maybe. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Wisz.
like, is the question looking at how can we encourage students to be involved in extracurricular?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I know. Maybe to generalize it, having students have missed so much time in person and not really been involved in those on-campus activities, how do we encourage that? How do we build kind of awareness of it maybe?
Yeah, it's tough because too, and I think it'll be lightening some of the restrictions, but we kind of even restricted more, right, with sports and extracurricular activities. But I think first and foremost of having that discussion, because as you know, and you guys have a whole bunch of friends that like to be involved with school, and then there's a whole bunch that don't want to be involved in school, and that's okay too. But we still want to encourage, and if you have friends that talk to you about that, and it's like, that's cool, you don't have to be super involved in school, but it is important, as we stressed earlier, to have those social connections. Social connections is really important with mental health, but maybe that can be through an online, video group or something like that. But one of the things too is utilizing your resources. Like I mentioned just a little bit ago, I would guesstimate a large part of our student population, their families don't know about the tutoring schedule, but do they know about the clubs and activity schedules? That Canyon Hills website, that homepage is chock full of resources. Like me, I didn't even know, like Shannon just put into the chat that these recordings are part of the principal's blog. I didn't know that. So one, it's accessing those resources. And then, we have a wellness center on campus, which is chock full of resources, but that could be a place where you walk in and say, how to get involved in, community types of activities, going over to the community center, right? Up Claremont Mesa Boulevard, popping in over there too. If the importance is having that social connection is really important, but it may not be a club or a sporting activity at school, but it could be other ways, right?
Yeah, I like that, being creative and utilizing opportunities that are already out there. So we are at our last little second, but I'll leave you with one more question if you have any thoughts on it, Mr. Wisz. So I know you kind of mentioned some resources for parents already, but if you have any additional thoughts on anything they should stop doing, keep doing, or start doing to kind of support their kids in this moment.
And kind of what I stress, because we're fixers. We want to make everything feel right, but I don't know if you guys know the military life coach, Miss Audrey over there, but she had a great analogy this morning. But it's like when a butterfly is coming out of a cocoon, right? It looks like it's struggling, right? It can't get out and stuff, and you want to go in there and you want to help the butterfly get out of the cocoon. Nope, you have to let that naturally happen. They have to get those dust on the wings, and it has to progress naturally. And that's for us as parents, is we need to keep in mind, again, listen to our children, but support them, like Nick had said earlier with those, or I think maybe it's the other student, but about verbal praise, right? Oh yeah, it was Shada who was talking about verbal praise, positively reinforcing our students, increase those dopamine levels. But we need to listen, and then we need to validate their feelings and what they're going through, and then support them, but more have them come up with the decision-making process, because of you folks as students are coming up with those decisions and empowering yourselves, right? And that we could be there. Great, that was a great idea. Good job. How are you going to have that happen? How can I help? That's the big question. How can I help you? How can I support you? But not just go in there and like, you're not getting up in the morning. You need to set your alarm and you need to wake up at 6:15. And I want that, right? But like parents do. No, come up with a plan. Listen, be supportive. Don't fix.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one for a lot of parents too, is just listen. Just because your kid might be coming to you doesn't mean they want a solution. They maybe just want someone to validate what they're feeling. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to all of our panelists today. I'm going to pass it back over to Shannon to close out.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attendees. Thank you, of course, to our youth leaders. As always, you're amazing, so insightful. Thank you to Mr. Wisz. I think we all walked away with some really kind of tangible, realistic takeaways that we, it's possible to do them. And I'm going to go tell my 14-year-old child that he's doing great. So just as a reminder, our last What I Wish My Parents Knew forum is scheduled in April. Keep your eyes out for information about that through all different outlets, social media, San Diego Military Family Collaborative, Canyon Hills High School, website and principal's blog. And you can email me there if you have any questions about forums or anything else. Like I mentioned, we're a resource center on campus, and so we can help link you to other resources. And if your child goes to Canyon Hills, they can certainly come visit us at our center. So we appreciate you all. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll see you in April.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Nick. Thanks so much.
Bye, thank you.
No
Bye,
problem. Good to see you.
Shada. Bye, Marissa. Thank you. Bye, Jesse.